In this clip, we can see Sam performing a 20-meter acceleration from sprint blocks. I'll be explaining why Sam is limited by capacity in this video in the form of lacking strength in some key areas for sprinting. Sam shows great skill by immediately splitting his hands away from the line as he pushes out of the blocks, projecting his whole body horizontally as he extends forward. His block clearance and hip extension could be improved with more strength in his glutes, particularly the glute medius in the last few degrees of extension, as well as better core stability and hip flexor power to assist with his horizontal projection and stride length. Despite Sam's great technique, the lack of power in his first movement results in him having to work harder to push and extend into a second stride. His skill allows him to correct the squatty angle he finds himself in at the first ground contact due to yielding at the hip and continue extending his strides slightly further. However, his stride and cadence don't start developing significantly until 4 to 5 strides into the acceleration. Sam's sprint technique demonstrates a high level of skill with his coordinated limb movements, fast negative foot speed, and ground contact time, as well as his ability to project his body horizontally. This points to Sam having excellent elastic capacities, but lacking the strength to express this with powerful forces into the track. I suspected that Sam needed to become more efficient in his stride by generating more horizontal forces and maintaining his horizontal angle for longer by becoming more stable throughout his entire body, or developing stride length and cadence with powerful aggressive movements. Sam has excellent scores in tests related to the reactive strength index, which were recorded with an app called My Jump Lab 3, so he can be categorized as a naturally elastic sprinter and leans towards the velocity side of the force velocity spectrum. Sam's squat PB was 1.2 times his body weight. At 18 years old, this is below the normative range of 1.5 to 2 times body weight for sprinters. This highlights the capacity challenge Sam faced. We increased this to 1.5 times his body weight over the course of 6 weeks by sensibly balancing a progressive overload strength phase in the gym, starting at 5 reps for 3 sets in the first week and progressing to heavier weight for 2 to 3 reps for 4 sets in the final week before testing. After 6 weeks, I transitioned his gym program away from a strength phase and worked down the force velocity curve to focus on rate of force development. Sam performed contrast sets of hex bar deadlifts for 3 reps at the same weight as his squat 1 rep max of 120. This was to work on moving at speed using his new strength with a shorter range of motion more applicable to sprinting angles. After 1 minute recovery, he performed 2 squat jumps for maximum height, as evidence shows a very large correlation between this jump and linear speed up to 30 meters in distance. After another 1 minute recovery period, he performed a 5-second split squat overcoming isometric exercise, pushing through his front foot as much as he can to increase his maximum force through his hip extensors. He did this for both legs. 4 sets were performed with 3 to 4 minutes recovery based on Sam's perception of his energy levels. This type of contrast training has been shown to lead to greater recruitment of motor units during explosive exercises. Contrast training also helps the nervous system to better synchronize the firing of motor units, which is essential for achieving high rate of force development. I also prescribed 3 sets of side planks with hip abduction for 8 reps per leg to improve Sam's glute medius and TFL strength and stability at the same time. This helped Sam's ability to keep his torso lengthened in the sprint without yielding at the pelvis upon ground contact and extend better with a crucial hip extensor that can be easily overlooked in SNC for sprinters. I aim to improve Sam's hip flexors with knee drives on the cable machine, again with the cue of keeping his spine lengthened to engage his core muscles while moving his leg. Sam became noticeably stronger and more explosive in these key areas over a 3-week period. Plyometric exercises such as drop jumps, pogo jumps, and ballistic exercises such as med ball throws and box jumps were also heavily used on the track during his potentiation phase of the warm-up. We can see in this more recent video that Sam's increased capacity allows him to accelerate competitively alongside his peers who are at a high level in the sport themselves. Sam can now explode out of the blocks at angles more conducive to producing horizontal force. He builds his momentum with every stride, which we can see by his stride length increasing and stride frequency decreasing, losing no time as he strikes the ground with very fast ground contact times. In the first video, Sam ran 20 meters in 3.04 seconds. In the final video, Sam ran 20 meters in 2.96 seconds, showing a marked improvement in his ability despite only being 3 weeks into a speed phase away from heavy lifting.
In contrast to Sam, Aaron's capacity is well suited to acceleration. Aaron can squat more than 2 times his body weight, as well as just under 2 times body weight in the clean and jerk. Competing in Olympic weightlifting means he can produce very high amounts of force quickly. He is limited by skill in accelerations, so we worked on improving his sprint technique with sprint drills and specific cues, which would improve his kinesthetics and somatic awareness. My reasoning for this was that Aaron has the capacity to produce a lot of force, but not necessarily in the movement patterns needed to accelerate effectively. Therefore, we needed to be specific in how he expresses his force output. Aaron started by using his muscular strength to accelerate. This is evidenced by how tense he is at his shoulders and hips. We can see that by his restricted movement and inability to build his stride effectively. Aaron's plyometric and sprint drills were similarly restricted for the same reasons. He also showed very little ankle flexion when striking the ground. Ankle stiffness and flexion through the stretch shortening cycle can often be low-hanging fruit for new sprinters. For this reason, we focused heavily on his ability to react quickly off the surface and pushing into the surface with his forefoot to get more rewards from the forces he can produce with his lower leg. Aaron also performed sprint drills while holding a dowel overhead at full stretch to further embody the lengthened position needed in sprinting. When Aaron showed more tension in his movements, we used breathing techniques to release the tension between reps, as well as reviewing video footage to make him aware of what is happening and attempting to match that to the perception he has of his own movements. I also showed him real-time and slow-motion videos of elite sprinters so he could visualize himself performing those movements with his own cues and attempt to apply it to his own movements. I opted against dictating which angles Aaron's limbs and joints should be reaching, as this takes a lot of thought. So it can often lead to overthinking and tension in the muscles, which prevents freedom of movement and fast twitches from the muscles that are needed in sprinting. Instead, I used cues that would put Aaron in the positions which dictate the correct angular forces. Aaron pushed backwards into the surface, into his set position to create elastic tension, then pushed through both feet at the same time as splitting his hands away from each other. This cue doesn't give the body enough time to extend upwards, only forwards, as the limbs will need to switch as soon as they extend forwards to prevent Aaron falling. He must then switch his limbs fast to continue the sprint. He is able to produce force quickly, so we're using his skills from Olympic weightlifting as cues in the sprint. The position he finds himself in produces a lot of force horizontally into the ground and projects his entire body forward with short ground contact time as he quickly moves on to the next step. This cue results in him having to be more assertive through every movement and uses power very quickly to continue building momentum. It took a few reps to understand and many reiterations in the following sessions. However, this idea that became subconscious to Aaron, and this creates an environment within all his body systems to move as quickly as possible with freedom to express his power through large ranges of motion. I assessed my own change of direction using the popular 5-10-5 test used in professional sports teams and the NFL Combine to test agility. At first, I tested this on an athletics track. However, the grip of the track wasn't good enough when changing direction. When comparing these videos to the tests I later performed on grass, I could clearly see that I had the capacity to absorb large amounts of forces and use powerful strides to project myself in the opposite direction. However, I didn't have the required skill and technique to change direction quickly and effectively. When I tested on grass 1 week later, we can see that I had learned some of the skill of deceleration and change of direction, but I hadn't mastered the force application that needs to be paired with that skill, even when I slowed down the movement. I noticed that both skill and capacity could be improved. However, I settled on prioritizing skill development. My reasoning is that I had conditioned myself to be strong in all directions, having played at a decent level of football and basketball. I will need to learn the basics of agility again before I can perform at a higher level. We can see in my 5-10-5 test that I'm not used to decelerating and lowering my center of mass back into a squatted acceleration position to change direction. This was also evident in some plyometric exercises and drills that will be shown later. I struggled to time my deceleration and approach the cones with large strides rather than measured, relatively shorter strides to increase ground contact and slow myself down. My focus here was to train my hips to drop fast into a squat position more conducive to producing force in the opposite direction. I performed some drills such as ladder in and outs, lateral skater jumps, shuffle into accelerations, cutting accelerations, single leg box jump, and depth jumps into a lateral jump. I used a weighted vest for some of these drills to help strengthen some key areas of the body, but also to slow me down and focus on the movement more. We can see in these videos that I am more used to being in an upright position for vertical force application. I attempted to coach myself into lowering my center of mass while performing these drills to make them more specific to the acceleration needed when changing direction. I chose unilateral movements over bilateral movements as they were more specific to a change of direction, and studies show more effective than bilateral. The use of staggered starting positions would also be a good addition and progression to my agility training. I could feel slight fatigue in my inner thigh and my inner soleus after working on drills repeatedly. I realized there's also a slight capacity issue here, and solving this would help me improve my skill development. I supplemented the specific running and agility drills with banded lateral crab walks and banded side steps, with the focus on really pushing through the inner leg by turning it inwards slightly as it extended. I used isometric exercises while pushing into an immovable object with maximum force for 10 seconds each rep to strengthen my inner ankle to keep them more stable on ground contact. After a few sessions of this, I performed the 5-10-5 test again, and we can see I became much more technically proficient. Interestingly, the 5-10-5 time on the track was 5.1 seconds with poor skill and a lot of time wasted when slipping on every turn. These slips meant I could only generate force off the front leg. The same test on the grass was 5.3 seconds after several tries with more traction and more suitable footwear, generating force through both legs. To improve my agility and 5-10-5 results, I would need to apply the skill I have in my acceleration to it. After decelerating effectively and positioning myself to project my momentum in the opposite direction, I need to get more out of my hip extensors to push back into the ground, generating more horizontal force. The position after the turn is very similar to that of a block start in sprinting, as there is a low center of gravity, acute chain angles relative to the surface, and the need to produce a lot of force. It's worth mentioning that this is a short period of time when turning and accelerating where rotational forces are high, so strengthening the rotational and anti-rotational qualities of my core could assist in piecing together the turn and the acceleration. Jerry shows good skill when decelerating and changing direction. Jerry competes in rugby as well as sprinting, so he has good awareness of his acceleration and agility. However, he lacks capacity in the form of stability and power. Jerry changes direction sharply when cutting, and even shows some skill with a double step that he frequently uses in rugby. Although Jerry can change direction sharply, he doesn't produce much force into his next acceleration steps after the turn. We can see that with the lack of power through his extension forward, so this tells me Jerry needs to improve the strength of his hip extensors. We can also see that Jerry's lower leg turns outwards quite significantly as it strikes the ground. Excessive external rotation can suggest weaknesses in hips and thighs, particularly the hip abductors, quadriceps, and in the ankle. Jerry didn't appear to have any issues when decelerating after running in a straight line. However, strengthening his hamstrings would likely improve his ability to decelerate faster and prevent injury. Having spotted potential strength weaknesses, I assessed Jerry's stability when standing on one leg with his other leg raised. His ankle showed a lot of instability getting into the position. We can also see his internal rotation at the hip is poor as his knee moves outwards when lifting it. To improve Jerry's stability, I have added variations of single leg standing positions whilst passing a light weight across his body, swinging his shoulders in a running motion. I also asked one of his teammates to throw a medicine ball in front of Jerry from the side whilst he's balanced on one leg. Jerry had to catch the medicine ball with as much control through his core and standing leg as possible to train his anti-rotational qualities and lower leg stability further. Jerry then threw the ball back with a rotation from his trunk. It will likely take some time for these adaptations to take effect, so Jerry will continue to perform these low load exercises in his warm-ups. To help Jerry gain more functional stability, he performed single leg hops, moving side to side. This will help strengthen his feet and ankles whilst also improving his ability to strike the surface quickly. To address Jerry's capacity challenges in his thighs and hips, I added several unilateral exercises to his training program. This will allow him to continue improving the kinematic aspect of his stability while strengthening his legs and core. I prescribed weighted step-ups in the gym. I made sure Jerry slammed his foot into the box, so his leg is forced to stabilise before stepping up for more kinematic adaptations. I told Jerry to drive his opposite knee up the hip for balance and coordination. Jerry also did weighted lunges with a pause at the lowest point of his range. This was so that he could think about his stability, then push backwards to return to his starting position. I chose pushing backwards as this uses posterior chain, strengthening particularly the hamstrings. Strengthening the hamstrings will assist in dealing with the braking forces of deceleration. I also made sure the Jerry's strength and conditioning program included Bulgarian split squats at RPE 9 for 3 sets of 3 reps per leg to really improve his strength and stability under stress. Cossack squats were prescribed to improve the strength of his adductors and improve his internal hip rotation capabilities. Jerry didn't show significant improvements in his most recent 5-10-5 test and cutting runs compared to the first tests in the previous week. These capacity adaptations will take some time to set in and blend with his current skill level and take a lot longer than a week to see improvements. I will continue to progress Jerry's capacity with the exercises shown using the progressive overload in the gym as much as we can if it suits his training schedule on the track and rugby pitch.